test Sif Yud Beis, Kafes Levim, Tek Levim, and we're discussing the Pasuk in Tehillim, Perik Yud Aleph, Hashem Tzadik Yevofen, God tests righteous people. You would think that God doesn't test us. We have another Medrash that tells us, in the beginning, everybody gets tested. This is the way God operates. But once you find out that Nebuch, a wicked type, a person doesn't want to do the will of God, can't even pass even the slightest test, there's no necessity to test him anymore. He's not in it at all. The only ones that are really tested and continue to be tested are the ones that persist in trying to do the will of God. Yes. That's right. The last statement in Bava Basra, in the first chapter, on Perik Aleph, Dav Yud Zayin, Oman Aleph, the last statement there tells that very thing. God, after a majority of a person's life, that they persist to try to become as righteous as they can, at that point, God steps in and helps them. And this is a very comforting thought. We don't have to do it alone. If we strive to become righteous, God will come. Although the time is alone. The Gemara says the person comes to purify himself, he'll be helped by God. Yes. Obviously.
And some people, when they're quite young, it seems that they get this let off in terms of either they're helped by God because they're meant to die young.
Yeah.
Or while others, maybe this means that they're meant to live a much longer time.
That's right. That is a good observation.
Does that mean that a person, everyone's tested? Everyone's tested.
Well, the thing is this, but nobody, if God forbid they make an improper decision or a series of improper decisions and go on the improper ways and they start getting troubles, sometimes the troubles are not because God is testing them in order to improve it, get him away from doing the bad things he's doing and start the proper direction.
So no first set up on the...
And a righteous type to a farmer that has 2 animals to work at his service to be done on earth. Who's going to do that are motivated to do the will of God? So trying to do the work of God, ones that God works with to a higher and higher degree of and to do so. And this is what the Medrash, in my humble opinion, is.
When someone is worried because if they become tzaddik, they're going to have constant trouble in this world, they won't have a chance to have any time to get the reward here. It's that because if they wait for the...
It's not possible to reward him.
If a person is constant pain and suffering, misery, and the only reward he gets is the fact that he's getting mitzvah, and he gets even a greater... Does he get a greater reward?
Yes, it depends on not only what he does, but his attitude and his appreciation of what God is doing. Some people, when they have troubles, they are very rebellious and they are critical of God. God does not send upon us trials and tribulations in order to just our life miserable. There is a purpose for that. Accept it with the proper love, proper understanding. That this is a good thing. Can you come to, in Torah, it means to bracha. It is not to be interpreted like people, unfortunately, many times interpret it as some kind of a punishment, and maybe something to stop people from doing wicked things. But for those that are striving to do right, Simalaya, which is true. Absolutely. This is the beauty of serving God. Not only does God give you credit, not only does God give you credit for what you're successful with, if you try to be a righteous type all your life, you unfortunately mess up everything up. The Yetzer Hara was given by God to operate as a catalyst to gird us to offer that purpose. But just let the Yetzer Hara be moral, dumb man. That is not the purpose that it was for. And if people do the will of God the way they should, the higher degree of reward that will arise to us, even the ministering angels. And we have many more that tell that in fact will happen for those that are believe in God and persist in the service of God the way they should.
When he said, if two people want to give $1,000 for 1,000 times,
Yes.
the one that gave 1,000 times more reward
He had to stay.
involved, I believe.
One chapter.
It says, Benhei Fu Sarah Agra is in proportion to the exertion. Chapter 1.
You have it? You have it?
157?
167. 67. Right in on top. When we say stop, and he was a great Talmud Chacham, Rabbi says, now all these great Tanoim said a lot of things. What is the proper path that a person should choose for himself to do? And the Mishnah says, Kol she's the Paris themselves, something that is good for him to do, it's good for his own self, it's only, in other words, it's not against his best interest. Teres lo min adam. It's also good if other people look upon it as it's something good for the community. And other times a person does something that's good for you. So the best way for a person to choose to live is to do something good both for himself as well as for the Jews. And you should be very careful when you do even this mitzvah that you would think that you don't have to do too much work with, as much as you would be careful, mitzvah, that you would think that you would have to spend much more effort on. Cases you are serving God, and you have to serve God with the best kind of mitzvah you're doing. Why should you do every mitzvah equally good? Know the real reward for the mitzvah that are given. You really don't know which mitzvah
is equal to the law. Exorcist is one of the greatest.
they all represent for our purposes. Therefore, he said, we don't know that. We are ignorant. So therefore, don't be so smart. It's not important you shouldn't do. Or maybe it is important. A person person wants certain things, but it's not, in order not to avoid doing the parts that we should do it all. You should think about what you're going to lose when you do a mitzvah. Even if you have to spend money by what you do, that's what you lose. And contrary-wise, in relation to consider what you think you're gaining by doing, in relation to how much you are, in fact, much more. Doctor should know what is God is checking on every cause. He's checking you on all those areas. And there is an ear that hears if you say something. Some of us different topic. And you should remember all your actions are written in a book. There's no forgetfulness in relation to God. God's keeping a complete record of whatever you're doing or not. About 400 to 500 years ago. And he says, Rabbi Omer, the inner column. You have Rabbi Omer, Rabbi, she had borrower, she choose. What is the proper way for a person to good for the person that does it, as well as good in relation to it should be good for him. We have no kimeno, and people should have a benefit from what that is the proper thing to do. What does that mean? That you should go on all the steps in a moderate path, in the middle path. In other words, you should not be an extremist. He find himself to one of the two extremes. But that is not a proper thing to choose. If he is very miserly, and every time money comes to his hand, he might table with the money, it's good for him. But people, he's cut off from himself the mitzvahs, and any anything away from moderation is not a religious. People make the mistake to assume a religious Jew is a Jew that lives in moderation. He's not a fanatic. He's not. The golden path is the path of moderation. Then he goes on further. But on the other hand, his money runs to his water like water. He spends it as soon as he gets it. No good too. So everybody that's around him gets no good for a while. But it's not good for him because he's going to imbalance. But the standard of being charitable, which is the middle class, being teaser between being a miser, being a spendthrift, he's the parasol. This is good. Why? Oh no, he's now responsible, he's watching his money. They have a father, and he's not spending more than he should. And also, because people have the benefit from it, no son gives what is for it to give. And standard applies to all the other standards. In other words, you should moderate that. The Rambam tells us then he has to work the other way to try to develop a more moderation. You understand? Either one way or the other. And that's not the Derech Torah. Don't make the assumption. It's one of the reasons I don't grow a beard. Because a lot of people think if you grow a beard, that makes you a religious Jew. It's not so. Whether you grow a beard or you don't grow a beard, doesn't make you a religious Jew. That's not one of the mitzvahs. Whether you grow a beard or you don't grow a beard. If you take off your beard, you're supposed to take off your beard in a way, not with a razor, with a regular razor or with a safety razor. Not permitted to do that. By the corners of your head, where your beard is and where your hair. But you can take it off with scissors, house or anything like that. But we have now electric razors. It's not an action of steel on bare skin. It's action of two pieces of steel rubbing against each other. That's scissor operation. So that's one of the reasons I do not wear a beard. Because people might erroneously imagine because you grow hair on your face, that makes you a religious Jew. I remember there was a case there where I went out with another gentleman he had a big beard, and I didn't have a beard. So we came someplace and they were addressing him, and he's the rabbi, more than he did. So people looked at you as a reward. It's not specifically reward for fulfilling positive commandments in the Torah. The Torah 13 commandments that the Jewish people are commanded. Some of them are only obligatory when the Jewish people live in Eretz Israel. Others only apply to the Kohen, the Levim, and there are 365 do not commandments, do not do, and 248 positive commandments, do. Now, in relation to the negative commandment, if a person violates this, he's going to be punished this way and this way. The Torah specifies that. But in relation to the positive, with the exception of 2 of the 240, there is no reward mentioned how much you're going to get for doing it. The only 2 commandments that are positive commandments, the reward is mentioned in the Torah, is Kibud Oveim, honor, and Shliach Hakam, sending away literally the nest. I mean, sending away, if a person wants food and he sees a mother bird, a kosher baby bird, he is permitted to send away the mother bird and take the baby birds for food. Permitted to take away both generations of birds. If a person does and sends away the mother bird, doesn't eat her, and just takes the baby birds for food, he's rewarded by living a long time. A person honors his father is also rewarded by living So the reward appears the same, although in our mind we would think that your father and mother. As I explained to you, we don't know the benefits of each. My father of blessed memory told me many years ago when I was going to Yeshiva that every mitzvah is given by God for a particular purpose to make some part of a human being. And so therefore all the mitzvahs together make for a good person having the evil of the losas have, but in relation to the punishment for a person that the negative commandments do not do, they're explained. Evil, a person that he could be stoned to death, God forbid, raper, he could be burnt to death, he could be killed with the sword, instead of putting him to death. He could die before his time, cut him off before the time that God originally allotted him to live. And he dies before his 50th birthday, or he dies by heaven before his 60th birthday, because he committed something that was against the will of God. Or sometimes he should be punished by being whipped. The more lenient, chamoro.
No matter what you do in order to do this mitzvah, God will reward you much greater than what you're putting in effort or in time or in money. This which you lose from your, what you sell, a businessman. You lose some of your overhead, you lose some of your stock, or some of your money. Consider what you lose, connected in relation to the reward, that will come to you because you are either in this world or in the world to come. He will be greater than the reward. On the other hand, if a person considers the reward of that particular transgression, that benefit or that enjoyment that you had in doing that sin in relation to the loss. Remember, we have learned that the Rabbi not only punishes a person for a sin, but he punishes a person for the sin. Because not only does a person get punished by God because he transgressed the will of God, he's punished also because he enjoyed transgressing the will of God. On the other hand, if a person does the will of God, not only is he rewarded for doing the will of God, but he's rewarded as well for the enjoyment that he did in doing the will of God. In other words, God pays heed to not only what a person does, but what a person is thinking when he's doing it. All right? Now, that was the verse. Let's go back. The Bible. So, join us. Can you follow in the Sefer? What's the proper way a person should choose? Something that is proper to him, for him, and also proper for the Jewish community as well. Look at the first Israel, Yochi, there. Who's Rabbi? Who Rabbeinu? You know Yochi was the great chief rabbi of Israel 100 years before the destruction of the Second Temple. And after he died, his son became the chief rabbi of Israel. And after his son died, his grandson became the chief rabbi of Israel. And after his grandson died, his great-grandson became the chief rabbi of Israel. We're talking now about the 7th generation of chief rabbis, one after the other. And they continued even afterwards. And they were from the descendants of King David. All these great Talmud scholars. He says, there are 3 ways in which a person can perfect himself in his world. What are they? This is in relation to his obligation, Shem Ha'odom. Relations to God, and the person has obligations, responsibilities. These are the commandments that are mentioned in the Torah, A person has obligations in relation to God, between God and people, and and he has obligations in relation to a man and his fellow man. He lived in Germany 100 years ago.
Right, because I know German, and there he translates there. He had, and here too again here.
Yeah,
Two.
yeah. He was the rabbi of Danzig, East Prussia.
Oh yeah. Yeah, Fichten, yeah.
Well, he was a great rabbi, and his father before him was a great rabbi, and he was relatively modern, only 100. Carl Licht, I had a Talmud named Carl Licht, and he told me his great grandfather and his great granduncle were great rabbis, and I saw a picture of the Rabbi Israel Lipschutz and my Talmud. And my Talmud's nose looks just like, so it definitely must be that family. This is a very short time ago. But you got to be a great Talmud scholar to be able to be printed as a commentary in the Mishnah.
This is one of the newest Mishnahs.
Another way in which a person can perfect himself is not only in relation to his obligation to God. We have the 10 Commandments. There are 10. Did you ever notice the 10 Commandments are found in 2 tablets? 5 commandments here and 5 commandments here. The first 5 commandments are commandments between God and a human being. This is what people have to do in relation to God. 5 commandments, 6 through 10 is fellow human beings. A person has to obligate themselves to perfect themselves by doing all these mitzvahs. You'll notice when a person does mitzvahs, they perfect themselves. They make themselves better people. Not like people would imagine. Not like people would imagine that when you go and do mitzvahs, not like people would imagine that when you do mitzvahs, you're doing God a favor. That's not so. God doesn't need us with our mitzvahs. God is the same Almighty God, whether we do any mitzvahs, but we need God. And when we do the mitzvahs, great miracles happen. Besides the fact that God rewards us for doing the mitzvahs, it makes us a better person. The more mitzvahs a person does, the better person that person becomes. This is one of the ways in which God rewards us. And he says now, first Israel goes on, Derech Hamidot. He says, not only does God, a person have to perfect himself in what they do, but also they got to have proper standards of conduct. It's not mentioned in Torah specifically that you got to have proper standards of conduct. Going, we took to the realm, but we can understand it from other things that's said in the Torah. What is it proper for a person, and what is it proper for him to keep away from doing? What is it improper for a person to do? To be a Baal Gaiva, when he is haughty and he treats everybody like dirt. We know that that's not a proper way for a person to live. And what is the proper way for a person to try to become? An honor, like Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe Rabbeinu was the most humble of all his people. And last week's Sedra in Baal Yisrael, the Torah, Rabbi Baruch Halevi Epstein, who was a great Talmud Chacham from 1860 to 1940. He was the son of the Aruch HaShulchan. He said what he describes about a Navi. He says when a person becomes a Navi, a prophet, he becomes that because of various things that he had. One is that he was a humble person, an honor. Another thing is God makes him wealthy, and God is because he is handsome of appearance, he has a commanding stature and everything. He has all these midas, and that's why God made him a prophet. Then the Torah Tamima says, he analyzes this, I don't understand what Chazal is telling us. If they say that to be an honor is a wonderful thing to be, that I understand. Yes, we have Maimorim Chazal tell us that Anibas leads to Yerushalayim, and Reshit Chochmah Yiras Hashem. And the beginning of Torah wisdom is the fear of the Lord, and this is a proper thing for a person to become. But the person is handsome, what should that make any difference in whether he's becoming a prophet? So he says we have to learn it this way. Who is more entitled to be praised? A person that has great beauty, handsomeness, he has great presence and everything, and yet he is the most humble of people, or a person that hasn't got anything and he's humble. It's much more praiseworthy for a person that has everything and still humble. That shows that he's really a very fine person, because not very many people that have wealth are God-fearing. Unfortunately, when they get a lot of money, they act meshugim, and they act the world is strange. They don't act like they should act. So he says you have to avoid gaiva, but you have to try to become an honor. You have to avoid anger. The Gemara says if anybody becomes angry, he hurts himself more than anybody else. It's not a good thing. You can get a stroke, God forbid. You get angry, you get a stroke. If a person loses his temper all the time. Sablonos is a person that is long-suffering and he doesn't become angry very fast. This is more healthy for you, more good. Fly off the handle every time somebody does something to you or says something to you. You accept it, and the truth is that if a person insults you and you keep your mouth shut and you don't answer him back, you are rewarded by God because you showed control. And the other person, of course, unfortunately, is punished because he did something improper. And then comes a person that is very miserly. That's not good either. We know if a person's got money, he should be a Baal Tzedakah. He should help his fellow Jews. He should go and do what has to be done. For instance, with God's help, God has made it that I learned a little Torah. So if I just learned Torah for myself and I didn't try to teach Torah to other people, it would not be a proper thing. That's not a proper thing for a Jew to do. If God gives you a strength in some area that you can help yourself and help others, you should do it. Vasronis, on the other extreme, if a person is a spendthrift, also not a proper thing for a person to do. Keduma, another thing. All extremes should be avoided. And what is it? He says you have to strive for the middle path between what's your obligation to yourself and to your fellow human being. In other words, don't go off the deep end one way or the other. This is the way a Jew should live. And then, besides the obligation to do the mitzvahs, besides the fact you've got to have moderate standards, not extreme, you also have their inheritance.
The German word
Yeah,
again.
it's wonderful for a Jew. This is the way a Jew should. And he should do mitzvahs in a way that he's not an extremist, and in a way that he doesn't go off the deep end one way or the other. And he should have good manners. They're very good to meet us. Good to make. He's not like a person that hurts everybody. You see some people, every time you come and near to them, they're hurting somebody. Either they're hurting somebody with their actions, or they're hurting something with their mouth. Some people you come near to, they always think something bad about somebody. It's a shrek chazak. That's the way they talk. They always say that, I didn't mean it, but they hurt people. Because other people, they come around, they become emotional. That's the way for a Jew to live. A Jew has got to be in such a way, first of all, he's not, and he's supposed to help him as best he can. All right, now let's go to the next mission. It came the chief rabbi of Israel, and he said, your foot down, get there. Yeah. He said there. He says like this, if a person learns Torah, just learns Torah alone, people would think, you learn Torah alone all the time, that should be very good. Talmud Torah, the mitzvah of Talmud Torah is equal to all the other mitzvahs in the Torah. Should be very good. He says, no, because you're going to an extreme. Yes.
I say the day.
What?
I say the day. Yeah. The safer that it shows the 10 levels of Hashem, the 10th and final level is that the level of trust is so high that, well, could you say it better than me?
The level of trust is so high that you don't have to worry about what's going to happen in the future, finance or anything of that nature. But what's this got to do with this particular mission?
What I'm saying is, if someone's at that 10th level, this doesn't pertain to them, or doesn't.
It pertains to most people. Well, to most people. It's not talking about the extra. We're talking about the ordinary religious Jew. He's not an extraordinary tzaddik. He is an extraordinary Russian. All his soul was just to learn Torah. He couldn't think about anything else. The Rambam says there was no sin in him, even if that's all he did. But we're talking about the ordinary person has other desires besides just learning Torah. He wants to get married, have children. Once you are ordinary, you can't do everything just by learning Torah. You also have to have a way of making parnosa, or work, or skora. You have to have some kind of work to help you in addition to learning Torah. If you do both things, you learn Torah very good, and very long, and you work, and you do that. Between the two activities, working and learning Torah and living according to the Torah, the tiring effect of doing both things makes you forget the sin. You have no kids. If you learn Torah, and then when you're not learning Torah, you're making a living, we're outside. Nobody has time or energy to do it. So this is a side benefit if you do this together. If you learn Torah with the way Rabbeinu Barabbat with a malacha or schora, a way of, with a type of a work activity or a business activity, you are occupied. You haven't got time to drag off with others. That's what Rabbeinu Barabbat learns, what is their. But in fact, Tiferet Yisrael learns a different thing with Derech Eretz and Israel. He says, with Derech Eretz here we're talking about something else. We're talking about, let's see, here. He says, when is the learning of Torah good? Only if you have with it mussar and humbleness. In other words, he says he's learning in a different way. He says he's not emphasizing you have to go and broaden your base. Rabbeinu Barabbat says you have to have a livelihood as well. He says, when you learn Torah, you got to learn Torah in a certain way. You got to learn Torah like a person that is humble and has a proper attitude towards Torah. It's not enough to learn Torah. If you learn Torah, but you don't have a proper respect for God's Torah, and you don't treat it as a holy thing, and you don't try to make it a part of your living, then it's not proper. Then you won't avoid sinning. Because just to learn Torah is just like another literature, another piece of information. But if you don't intend to apply it the way the Torah wants to be applied, still you won't avoid sinning. It's not enough to learn what the right thing is. You also have to do the right thing. It's not sufficient just to learn, oh, I know what the right thing is. What good is it you know? There are a lot of people, they go to yeshivas, go to the best places to learn, but then when they come out of the yeshivas, they forget. They don't learn anymore, and they don't do anymore. Big deal. So what's the good? The learning Torah is intended to give you the necessary knowledge so that together with the proper attitude, you can implement it into your daily living. If you have a Torah, but you don't have any work with it, in other words, you have no way of making a living, Sofa Batela, the end will be that, God forbid, you won't even be able to learn any more Torah because you're starving. You got to try to make some kind of a living. Anybody who works hard, we need to go and help them. In many areas they need help. You are molim to work with them for the proper motivation, for the sake of heaven, that the merit of the forefathers of the Jewish community will help people that are doing it right, and their great righteousness will stand forever. And you that are engaged in trying to go and help the Jewish community, I will consider it to you. It was done together.
Okay, that was chapter.
You remember last time Israel was fighting a battle against their enemy, the Canaanite, and God should give the Jewish people into the hands of the Jewish army. And in front of the whole people and all the army, he told the sun and the moon to stop still. Great miracle happened. All right, now what's your shadow? You have a shadow this week's Sedra?
I thought I could ask you before you went to
That's okay. What's this week's Sedra? The Shalach. Last week's Sedra?
Yeah, Yod Beis.
Let's get on. And Moshe and Miriam spoke against Moshe.
But this particular.
And then God came and he appeared to all three of them. And he said, to Shalosh Techem, go out you three. And Rashi said, this tells us all three of them were called out by one word, to hear. God spoke individually to all three of them. And that is a miracle, because you can't speak to three people at the same time unless you speak to them all at once.
That doesn't mean that.
The Medrash test Sif Yud Beis, Kafkas Levim, Tek Levim, and we're discussing the Pasuk in Tehillim, Perik Yud Aleph, Hashem Tzaddik Yevochim, righteous people. You would think that God doesn't test righteous ones, he would test them. We have another Medrash that tells us, in the beginning, everybody gets tested. This is the way God operates. But once you find out that Nebuch, a wicked type, a person doesn't want to do the will of God, can't even pass even the slightest test, there's no necessity to test him anymore. He's not in it at all. The only ones that are really tested are the ones that persist in trying to do the will of God. Yes, sir.
The person is either basically, wouldn't it be after?
That's right. The last Tosfos in Bava Basra, in the first chapter, on Perik Aleph, Daf Yud Zayin, Oman Aleph, the last Tosfos there tells that very thing. God, after a majority of a person's life, that they persist to try to become as righteous as they can, at that point God steps in and helps them. And this is a very comforting thought. We don't have to do it alone. If we strive to become righteous, God will come. Although the time is alone. The Gemara says a person comes to purify himself, he'll be helped by God, obviously.
And some people, when they're quite young, it seems that they get this let off in terms of either they're helped by God because Nebuchadnezzar die young,
Yeah.
or while others they don't get anywhere. Maybe this means that they're meant to live a much longer time.
That's right. That is a good observation. You think of it as a good observation.
Does that mean that a person is both, everyone's tested? Everyone's tested?
Not so.
But how is it established whether a person's going towards wickedness or...
The thing is this, but nobody, if God forbid they make an improper decision or a series of improper decisions and go on the improper ways and they start getting troubles, sometimes the troubles are not because God is testing him in order to improve him. He's testing him in order to go and get him away from doing the bad things he's doing and start on us a sort of punishment in order to push him on the proper direction.
So if God was not really motivated towards being a tzaddik, he may let us pass?
He may very well, yes. Because such a person can't pass. That's what we're talking about. The Gemara compares a wicked type and a righteous type to a farmer that has two animals, work animals. One is a cripple and one is a well animal. If he has to work the field, he's not going to use a crippled animal. He's going to use the well animal. Same thing. God, his service to be done on earth. Who's going to do it? Only those that are motivated to do the will of God. Those are trying to do the work of God. And these are the ones that God works with and tries to elevate them to a higher and higher degree of Tahara and Kedusha. And this is what the Medrash, in my humble opinion, is teaching us, yes.
When someone is worried because if they become a tzaddik, they're going to have constant trouble in this world, they won't have a chance to have any time to get the reward here. It's that because if they wait for the reward that's here in the next world to come, it'll be even greater than if it was in this world. So it'll be worth it.
The reward for a tzaddik in the world to come, because the amount of righteousness that he does
is not possible to reward him adequately in this world.
But if a person is constant pain and suffering, misery, and the only reward he gets is the fact that he's getting mitzvah, and then he gets even a greater, that doesn't he get a greater reward in the world to come?
Absolutely. It depends on not only what he does, but his attitude and his appreciation of what God is doing to him. Some people, when they have troubles, they are very rebellious and they are critical of God. And that, of course, is not a proper attitude at all. God does not send upon us trials and tribulations in order to make our life miserable. There is a purpose for that. If we accept it with the proper love, proper understanding, we in fact understand that this is a good thing and leading us to a good thing. The Gemara says in Brachos that only through Yisurim, through trials and tribulations, can a person come to Pelik Olam Haba. Can he come to Pelik in Torah? Can he come to Pelik in Eretz Yisrael? So that means Yisurim is a means to Bracha. It is not to be interpreted like the people, unfortunately, many times interpret it as some kind of a punishment. It may be a deterrent and may be something to stop people from doing wicked things in some areas. But for those that are striving to do the will of God, it in fact is not. All right, Simoneo. Absolutely. This is the beauty of serving God. Not only does God give you credit, not only does God give you credit for what you're successful in, even if you're a hopeless mess from beginning to end, did it 100%. If your attitude is right and if your track record is right, if you try to be a righteous type all your life, and even though you unfortunately or fortunately mess up everything for reasons beyond your control, you're known as, we learned the Gemara in many places that God gives you credit as though you actually did it 100%. And it's like you can't. The Yetzer Hara was given by God to operate ideally as a catalyst, gird us to rise to a higher challenge. If some people do not use the Yetzer Hara for that purpose, but just let the Yetzer Hara leave them around like a dumb animal to the slaughter, that is not the purpose that it was for. It was given in order they should rise to a higher challenge. And they could come, if people do the will of God the way they should, God will bless them with a higher degree of reward than even the ministering angels in heaven. We will rise to a higher degree of holiness than even the ministering angels. And we have many Maimorim that tell us that in fact will happen for those that believe in God and persist in the service of God the way they should. Yes?
When you said if two people work to $1,000, one gave it at one time and one gave it $1 for 1,000 times.
Yes.
They gave 1,000 times more reward.
He had to awaken himself the desire to give 1,000 times, whereas the other case, over a period of time, I would like such a rich man, $1 a time to get. $1, come tomorrow, $1, come the next day, $1. He'll have other business. He'll have a seaboard. He'll be able to go and influence others to do proper things. In other words, the more time a person does what should be done, the better it feels in him a gooder, he becomes a better person, and eventually he does it. This is the thing to do. You wouldn't dream.
More if it is given in one thing. Not that you don't want to give it in 1,000.
Well, that would be in Yotzei Minakal, it'd be an exception to the rule. We're talking about ordinary. To do a proper thing is much more if you have to do it 1,000.
I just want to prove what you're saying in Hey Vav, I believe.
What, chapter 5?
After Ben Bag, it says Ben Hey Omer is in proportion to the exertion.
Mishnah 170, page 170. 170, yeah, 170.
170.
Mishnah, I'm getting of chapter 2 already.
Long time ago.
If you want me, I can repeat it, chapter 2.
Why can't we do chapter 1?
We've already done that. All right? You have it?
Yes, it was chapter 4 or something.
No, that's 167. You have it?
157?
167.
67. 67, get safe.
You have it right there.
Oh,
When we say stop, because Rabbi Yehuda was the chief rabbi of Israel, and he was a great Talmud, beloved by everybody, so they called him Rabbi. He was the seventh. So Rabbi says, now all these Greeks done a lot of things. What is the proper that a person should choose for himself to do? And the Mishnah says, Koshi separis themselves, something that is good for him to do, so it's good for his own self. It's only, in other words, it's not against his best interest. It's also good if other people look upon it as it's something good for the community. Sometimes a person does something that's good for him but doesn't have, and other times a person does something that's good for you. So the best way for a person to choose to live is to do something good both for himself as well as for the Jews. And you should be very careful when you do even the mitzvah that you would think that you don't have to do too much work with, just as much as you would be careful to do the most rigorous mitzvah that you would think that you would have to spend much more effort on. Because in both cases you are serving God. And you have to serve God with the best intent, no matter what kind of mitzvah you're doing. Why should you do every mitzvah equally good? Because you don't know the real reward for the mitzvahs that are given. Since you don't know the real reward the mitzvahs are given, you really don't know which mitzvahs and which mitzvahs are the better mitzvahs.
After you say the bracha for Torah, it says the learning Torah is equal to the law.
Besides learning the Torah.
It says tefillin is one of the greatest.
That's right, it's one of the greatest, and all of them are one of the greatest. Because they all represent the will of God. For our purposes, it's like a person needs certain things. Our Father in heaven knows what we need. Therefore, he set out a program that if we do all the things that he tells us to do, it will be good for us in all the ways that we need to live. We don't know this. We are ignorant, we're not knowledgeable in the area. So therefore, don't be so smart as to think that you should just concentrate on, and the things that you don't are not important you shouldn't do, because that's not true. How do you know that it's important? Maybe it is important. They have an example. A person, truthfully speaking, iron and more basic things are also necessary for his livelihood. You understand? First, certain things, but it's not necessarily what God wants. In order not to avoid the parts that we should do it all. That's a mitzvah connected Torah. You should think about what you're going to lose when you do a mitzvah in relation to how much you're going to gain by doing it. Even if you have to spend money, you can rest assured that God will reward you much by what you do than what you lose. In relation to a transgression, you should remember, you should consider what you think you're gaining by doing it in relation to how much you are in fact losing. Much more, because God does not permit people to conquer his will without punishing them. If you'll think about three things,